Number one victory royale. Yeah, Fortnite, we bout to get down.
Damn, what is that, bro?
She's a Geo mommy who's going to be releasing pretty soon. So in this video we'll cover and understand pretty much everything about her, from her kit to her build. Starting off, we're going to skip her normal and other types of attacks because they don't do much unless you're using her skill, so let's get straight into it. After clicking on her skill, she'll dash forward a bit, dealing decent damage, and enter her Night Soul's Blessing state with 45 Night Soul point. So her Night Soul Blessing state is also called the Blade Roller mode, and it infuses her normal and plunging attacks with Geo damage, which cannot be overridden, and scales of her defense. Along with normal attack buffs, it increases Xilonen's walking and climbing speed by a lot too. Now this is not the main point of her skill, and this is just secondary, as after using her skill she activates something even better. And before knowing that, we have to understand something first. So she carries something called the source samples with her all the time, and she has 3 of those, and to keep it simple, let's just call it papers. So she has 3 different types of paper. Initially, they are all Geo, but they can change their elemental type, and they'll try to match the elemental type of your party members. Let's look at an example. In your party, you have Xilonen, Xiangling, Ganyu, and Ye Miko. Now Xilonen's paper will automatically change to the elemental type of your party members. These papers were all initially Geo, but they'll now change, so you're going to have a Pyro, Cryo, and Electro paper. Now you might be wondering, what's the purpose of these papers? These papers will help you reduce the elemental resistance of the enemy. But before talking more about that, let's see how to activate these papers first, because up till now they have just been converted to a different element and haven't been activated yet. So the paper activation mechanic is crafted around her first passive. Let's understand what it does. When Xilonen's in Night Soul Blessing state and has at least 2 papers that had their elemental types changed, she gains 35 Night Soul points when her normal or plunging attacks hit opponents. This one's really important, and Kinnich's kit is a good example of this. And if Xilonen has fewer than 2 papers that have had their elemental types changed, her normal and plunging attacks deal 30% increased damage. Now the Night Soul gaining mechanism is what will activate those papers. So to activate the papers, you need to hit her Night Soul cap, which is 90 Night Soul points. Now, after using her skill, you get 45 Night Soul points instantly by default, and her first passive allows her to gain 35 Night Soul points by hitting an enemy. So you have 45 points at the start, you hit the enemy once, it's 80 now, and you hit an enemy again, and now you've reached the cap. And after you hit 90 points, she's going to use all the Night Soul points at once and activate all 3 papers she has for 15 seconds. Now, as for the percentage of resistance reduction, at talent level 10, each paper provides an elemental resistance reduction of 36%. Now this can even go higher with Constellations, which we'll look at in a bit. So a typical way you'd want to use her is to switch to Xilonen, use her skill, attack the enemy 2 times in the Night Soul Blessing state. That'll activate the papers, then continue with whatever rotation you were doing, as now the papers have been activated. Some additional things that you should know about her kit are that the Night Soul points have a time limit of 9 seconds, so you have to activate the paper within 9 seconds, which should be really easy. But if for some reason you aren't able to reach the cap, the Night Soul's Blessing will end and her skill will go into a cooldown. The cooldown is going to be 7 seconds. And suppose you're running her in a mono Geo team, then you don't really need to hit her Night Soul cap to activate the paper, as initially all papers are Geo, and Geo papers are automatically activated if you use her skill. Once again, this only works on Geo and no other element because her element is Geo. Going to her burst, it is pretty unique as it can have 2 different modes, and these are dependent on her source samples, or as we have been calling it, papers. So after using her burst, she deals decent AoE damage, and if she has at least 2 papers that have had their elemental types changed, Xilonen will play in a buoyant rhythm, healing nearby active characters at intervals, and the healing will be based on her defense. As for its duration, it's going to last for 12 seconds, and here's the multiplier. Moving on, you have to understand something before looking at the second part of her burst. So after she uses her burst, she releases beats. As you can see, these are called beats, and they deal Geo damage based on her defense. So now if she has fewer than 2 papers that have had their elemental types changed and she uses her burst, she will start up an Ardent Rhythm, and this will release 2 additional beats. So basically, in a mono Geo team she turns into a DPS, and in a non-Geo team she's a 10 out of 10 support. As for the burst cost and cooldown, it has an energy cost of 60 energy, which is decent, and a cooldown of 15 seconds. As for leveling up these talents, the talent priority should be like this. You'd want to go with Elemental Skill first, Elemental Burst second, and finally with normal attacks. Moving to her passives, we already talked about what her first passive does, so let's directly start with her second passive. Her second passive says that, when her Night Soul points reach the maximum, she will trigger an effect equal to that of her Night Soul Burst. Now, since it's equal to that of her Night Soul Burst, I think it'll be just considered a Night Soul Burst. This can be triggered once every 14 seconds. Oh boy, does Hoyo love complicating things. Anyhow, along with this, when a party member triggers a Night Soul Burst, Xilonen's defense is increased by 20% for 15 seconds. Her third passive is just about phlogiston mechanics and Night Soul transmission. If you don't know about Night Soul transmission, so if while running, climbing, or being in a certain height in air, you switch to Xilonen's, she'll automatically enter her skill mode. However, she starts with half the Night Soul points. Her last passive restores 15 phlogiston if you trigger Night Soul transmission. Going to her constellations, her C1 gives lots of stuff. Firstly, the active character interruption resistance increases when her papers are active. Secondly, her Night Soul points and phlogiston consumption are also decreased by 30%. And finally, her Night Soul point time limit is extended by 45% too. If we calculate this, 45% of 9 seconds is 4.05 seconds. So now her Night Soul point time limit is 13.05 seconds. In her C2, her Geo papers will always remain active. This means that you don't even need to use her skill to activate her papers. Her Geo papers will always be active. So basically, if she joins your party, that should be an instant Geo resistance decrease to the enemies. And that's not all, as this constellation adds another reason to activate her papers now. If you do use her skill and activate her papers, all nearby party members who match the paper's elemental type will gain a corresponding buff. The buffs are as follows. Hoyo seriously needs to calm down with these overpowered Natlan characters. Her C3 raises her skill level by 3. Now this is really good, as her skill carries her entire kit. Why? Because it helps reduce the elemental resistance. So normally at talent level 10, you get a reduction of 36%, but with this constellation, the talent level is now 13, and the reduction percentage increases to 45%. This is really broken. She literally outperforms Viridescent Veneerer, an artifact dedicated to decreasing elemental resistance. But ignoring that and looking on the bright side, if you pair her up with another Anemo unit with Viridescent Veneerer and target a specific element, then, goddamn, you're looking at an 85% elemental resistance decrease. C4 just increases your party member's damage after using Xilonen's skill. Not elemental damage, but physical damage. It increases your character's normal, charged, and plunging damage by 65% of Xilonen's defense. This effect lasts for 15 seconds, and every single party member can trigger it a total of 6 times. Her C5 will just increase her burst level by 3. Last but not least, her C6 significantly enhances her performance as a DPS unit. What it does is, after using her skill and entering Night Soul's Blessing state, if she sprints, leaps, or uses normal or plunging attacks, she'll enter an Imperishable Knight's Blessing state. Imperishable simply means unlimited. This state lasts for 5 seconds and buffs Xilonen's normal and plunging damage by 300% of her defense. Also during this specific period, Xilonen's stamina or phlogiston points will not decrease, and if she reaches maximum Night Soul points, her Night Soul will not end either. As for the limit, she can only trigger it once every 15 seconds. About her constellations, now her best constellation has to be C2 and C3. C1 is pretty good too, but it's more exploration-oriented. In terms of gameplay and value, both C2 and C3 are just insane and provide really great value. Now that we know how her kit works and whatnot, let's look at how you can build her. Before talking about her build, let's look at Xilonen herself. With her Ascension, she gains defense percentage. So at level 90, she gains 36% defense. Here's some additional information too. Starting off with her artifact set, you should use this set. It's called the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City, and it goes really well with her kit. Now, if you don't know about this artifact, explained simply, it restores 6 energy when an ally triggers a Night Soul Burst in its 2-piece set. And in its 4-piece set, if the equipper triggers a reaction related to their elemental type, it'll give your party members a 12% elemental damage bonus. Additionally, if the equipper is in Night Soul's Blessing while triggering the reaction, it can give up to 28% elemental damage bonus to nearby party members for 20 seconds. Looking at the main stats you'd want to prioritize. You want to go with defense percentage on stands, defense percentage on goblet, and defense percentage on circlet too. We are going with all defense because, well, firstly, she's a support, and more importantly, her entire kit scales of defense. And yeah, defense artifacts are easy to farm too, so just go with defense. As for the substats, you can go with energy recharge, defense again, and either crit rate or crit damage. Talking about her weapons, let's start with her signature weapon first. Her signature weapon is called the Peak Patrol Song, and it's a sword. The weapon passive is something like this. So when your normal or plunging attacks hit an opponent, you'll gain something called the Ode to Flowers. It'll increase your defense by 8% and give you a 10% all-elemental damage bonus for 6 seconds. And you can have a maximum of 2 stacks. Now there's more. So when you reach 2 stacks, it'll increase all your nearby party members' all-elemental damage bonus by 8% for every 1000 defense the equipping character has. And you can gain up to a maximum of 25.6% bonus this way for 15 seconds. So you need a total of 3200 defense to get the most out of this weapon. Here are the refinement values too. Now, if you're Primo less like me and want some more alternatives, you can go with either the Flute of his Pitzel or the Cinnabar Spindle. Both of these weapons are excellent for her because they give her lots of defense and buff her skill damage. Between both of these, the Flute of his Pitzel is a craftable weapon, so you should be good. As for Xilonen's team comps, personally there's no fixed team comp for her, since you know how her kit works. She's basically Kazuha Pro Max, so you could just slap her in any team you'd want to increase the damage of. The same could go with any type of main DPS as well. For example, suppose you want to buff your main DPS, then you could go with whomever you want, then take an Anemo unit with Viridescent Veneer, Xilonen herself, and some other character who supports your main DPS in some way. So you can probably form your own teams depending on what you need. Now, my overall impression of her is that Xilonen is a unique and powerful support character. Her potential for enhancing damage and providing healing makes her a fantastic addition to any comp. If you enjoy characters that offer a blend of complexity and versatility, Xilonen might just be the mommy you need in your team.